This is the story of the fisherman and his wife. Once upon a time, a fisherman and his wife lived together in a little hut on the coast of Scotland. And the fisherman used to go down every day to fish. And he would fish and fish. So he used to sit with his rod and gaze into the shining water. And he would gaze and gaze. But one day, as he gazed out, he saw something strange floating in the sea. And he swam out to it, for it wasn't far from shore. When he pulled it in, he found it was the skin of a seal, the seal's silky coat. And he knew indeed right away that he had found a selkie coat. He brought the coat back to shore and laid it out in the warm sun on the sand where it might dry. And he waited, and his waiting paid off. For soon a beautiful woman came walking down the sand. She was naked and shimmered, and she was searching as if for shells, but he knew it was not for shells. And, like a good man, he looked away from the beautiful woman and spoke to her, saying, "Beautiful woman, perhaps this is yours." And he held out his hand and pointed at the seal coat. The woman said nothing, but quickly wrapped the coat around her. She walked into the water, and as she did, she turned into a lovely lithe seal and swam away. Now, little did he know that this was no ordinary selkie, if any selkie can be called ordinary. But this was the queen of the selkies. The man caught nothing that day, and when he went home, his wife was hard on him. His wife was a gentle sort, but even the gentlest get out of sorts sometimes. The next day, when the man went down to the sea to fish and fish and fish, he gazed into the shining water, and he saw a seal's head emerge. And out from the sea came the beautiful woman, changing slowly from seal to lady as she crossed the border between ocean and sand. She thanked him for what he had done and told him that she was indeed queen of the selkies and that she would always be his friend. The man didn't know what to say, but he thanked her in turn, for he felt honored to have been part of the life of a queen, and the queen of the selkies nonetheless. The selkie queen swam back out into the sea. That day, when the man got home, he had again got nothing, and the wife, hunger making her sharper, said caught nothing today." Then the man told his wife of the selkie. "And did you wish nothing from her?" said his wife. "No," said the man. "What should I have wished?" "Ah," said the woman, "it's dreadful to have to live all of one's life in this hut that is so small and dirty. You ought to have wished for, I don't know, a cottage. I think you should go back and call to her and say that we choose to have a cottage, and certainly, for what you did, she will give it to you." For the wife knew something of selkies. She knew that had her husband kept the coat instead of returning it to its owner, the selkie would have been bound to him and bound to her human form. "Alas," said the man, "I cannot ask anything of her." "Why," said his wife, "surely you almost good as caught her, and then let her go again, so she is sure to give you what you ask. Go down quickly." The fisherman did not like going at all, but as his wife was not to be persuaded, he went down to the sea. When he came there, the sea was quite green and yellow and was no longer shining. So he stood on the shore and said, "O wondrous woman, if woman you be, or selkie, seal queen of the sea, come, for my wife Isabel wishes what I dare not tell." And, much to his surprise, the selkie queen came swimming up and said, "Well, what does she want?" "Alas," said the man, "my wife says I ought to have kept you and wished something from you. She does not want to live any longer in our hut. She would like a cottage." "Go home then," said the generous seal queen. "She has it." So the man went home, and there was his wife no longer in the hut, but in its place was a beautiful cottage, and his wife was sitting in front of the door on a bench. She took him by the hand and said to him, "Come inside and see if this is not much better." They went in, and inside the cottage was a tiny hall, and a beautiful sitting room and a bedroom in which stood a bed, a kitchen and a dining room, all furnished with the best of everything, and fitted up with every kind of useful thing. And outside was a little yard in which were chickens and ducks, and also a little garden with vegetables and fruit trees. "See," said the wife, "isn't this nice?" "Yes," answered her husband, "here we shall remain and live very happily." "We will think about that," said his wife. With these words, they had their supper and went to bed. All went well for a week or a fortnight. Then the wife said, "Listen, husband, the cottage is much too small, and so is the yard and the garden. The selkie might as well have sent us a larger house. I should like to live in a great stone castle. I think you should go down and ask her to send us a castle." "Oh, wife, I cannot do that," said the fisherman. "The cottage is quite good enough. Why do we choose to live in a castle?" "Why," said the wife, "you go down. The selkie queen can quite well do this." "No, wife," said the man. "She gave us the cottage. I do not like to go to her again. She might take it amiss." "Go for me," said his wife. "She can certainly give it to us, and ought to do so willingly for what you gave back to her. Go at once." The fisherman's heart was very heavy. He did not like going. He said to himself, "It is not right." Still he went down. When he came to the sea, the water was all violet and dark blue and dull and thick, and no longer green and yellow, but it was still smooth. So he stood there and said, "O wondrous woman, if woman you be, or selkie, seal queen of the sea, come, for my wife Isabel wishes what I dare not tell." "What does she want now?" said the selkie queen, appearing. "Ah," said the fisherman, startled and half ashamed, "she wants to live in a great stone castle. The Seal Queen shook her head and laughed. Go home, she is standing before the door. The fisherman went home and thought he would find no house. When he came near, there stood a great stone palace, and his wife was standing on the steps about to enter. She took him by the hand and said, "Come inside." Then he went with her, and inside the castle was a large hall with a marble floor, and there were heaps of servants who threw open the great doors, and the walls were covered with beautiful tapestry, and in the apartments were gilded chairs and tables, and crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and all the rooms were beautifully carpeted with the softest of rugs. The best of food and drink was also set before them when they wished to dine, and outside the house was a large courtyard with horse and cow stables and a coach house, all fine buildings, and a splendid garden with most beautiful flowers and fruit, and in a park quite a league long were deer and roe and hares and everything one could wish for. "Now," said the wife, "isn't this beautiful?" "Yes, indeed," said the fisherman, "and now we will stay here and live in this beautiful castle and be very happy." "Oh, yes, yes," said his wife, "we will consider the matter." And they went to bed. But the next morning the wife woke up first at daybreak and looked out of the bed at the beautiful country stretched before her. Her husband was still sleeping, so she dug her elbows into his side and said, "Husband, get up and look out the window. Could we not become the king of all this land? I think you should go down to the selkie and tell her we choose to be king." "Ah, wife," replied her husband, "why should we be king? I don't want to be king." "Well," said his wife, "if you don't want to be king, I will be king. Go down to her. I will be king." "Alas, wife," said the fisherman, "why do you want to be king? I can't ask her that." "And why not?" said his wife. "She is a queen. Why should not I be one as well? Go down. I must be king." So the fisherman went, though much vexed that his wife wanted to be king. "It's not right, it's not right," he thought. He did not wish to go, yet he went. When he came to the sea, the water was dark gray color, and it was heaving against the shore. So he stood and said, "O wondrous woman, if woman you be, or selkie, seal queen of the sea, come, for my wife Isabel wishes what I dare not tell." The selkie swam to shore, stood before him. "And what does she want now?" "Alas," said the fisherman, "she wants to be king." "Go home. She is that already," said the Seal Queen, quickly turned and threw herself back into the water. The fisherman went home, and when he came near the palace, he saw that it had become much larger, and that it had great towers and splendid ornamental carving on it. A sentinel was standing before the gate, and there were numbers of soldiers with kettle drums and trumpets. And when he went into the palace, he found everything was made of pure marble and gold, and the curtains of damask with tassels of gold. Then the doors of the hall flew open, and there stood the whole court round his wife, who was sitting on a high throne of gold and diamonds. She wore a great crown and had a scepter and precious stones in her hand. And by her on either side stood 6 pages in a row, each one a head taller than the other. Then he went before her and said, "Ah, wife, are you king now?" "Yes," said his wife, "now I am king." He looked upon her, and when he had looked for some time, he said, "Let that be enough, wife, now that you are king. Now we have nothing more to wish for." "Nay, husband," said his wife restlessly, "my wishing powers are boundless. I cannot restrain them any longer. You must go down again to the selkie. King I am, but I must be emperor." "Alas, wife," said the fisherman, "why do you want to be emperor?" "Husband," she said, hardly knowing why, "go, I will be emperor." "Oh, wife," he said, "she cannot make you emperor. I don't like to ask her that." There is only one emperor in the kingdom. Indeed and indeed, she cannot make you emperor. What? Said his wife. I am king and you are my husband. Will you go at once? Go. If she can make king, she can make emperor. And emperor I must and will be. Go. So he had to go. But as he went, he felt quite frightened, and he thought to himself, this can't be right. To be emperor is too ambitious. The seal queen will be tired out at last. Thinking this, he came to the shore. The sea was quite black and thick, and it was breaking high on the beach. The foam was flying about and the wind was blowing. Everything looked bleak. The fisherman was chilled with fear. He stood and shaking said, O wondrous woman, if woman you be, or selkie seal queen of the sea, come, for my wife Isabel wishes what I dare not tell. What does she want now? Asked the seal queen, rising. Alas, queen, he said, my wife wants to be emperor. Go home, said the queen, she is that already. So the fisherman went home, and when he came there, he saw the whole castle was made of polished marble, ornamented with alabaster statues and gold. Before the gate, soldiers were marching, blowing trumpets and beating drums. Inside the palace were walking barons, counts, and dukes, acting as servants. They opened the door, which was of beaten gold, and when he entered, he saw his wife upon a throne which was made out of a single block of gold, and which was quite 6 cubits high. She had on great golden ornaments and crown, which was 3 yards high, and set with brilliant and sparkling gems. In one hand she held a scepter, and in the other the imperial globe, and on either side of her stood 2 rows of halberdiers, each smaller than the last, with a 7-foot giant to the tiniest little person no higher than my little finger. Many princes and dukes were standing before her, and the fisherman went up to her quietly and said, Wife, are you emperor now? Yes, she said, I am emperor. He looked at her magnificence, and when he had watched her for some time said, Ah, wife, let that be enough, now that you are emperor. Husband, she said, why are you standing there? I am emperor now, and I want to be pope too. Go down to the selkie. Alas, wife, said the fisherman, what more do you want? You cannot be pope. There is only one pope in Christendom. The selkie cannot make you that. Husband, she said, I will be pope. Go down quickly. I must be pope today. No, wife, said the fisherman, I cannot ask that. It is not right. It is too much. The selkie cannot make you pope. Husband, what nonsense, said his wife. If the selkie can make emperor, she can make pope too. Go down this instant. I am emperor and you are my husband. Will you be off at once? So he was frightened and went out. But he felt quite faint and trembled and shook, and his knees and legs began to give way under him. The wind was blowing fiercely across the land, and the clouds flying across the sky looked as gloomy as if it were night. The leaves were blown from the trees, and the water foamed and seethed and dashed upon the shore, and in the distance he saw the ships in great distress, dancing and tossing on the waves. Still the sky was very blue in the middle, although at the sides it was an angry red as in a great storm. So he stood shuddering in anxiety and said, O wondrous woman, if woman you be, or selkie, seal queen of the sea, come, for my wife Isabel wishes what I dare not tell. The seas bubbled and frothed, and the selkie, larger than life, appeared, strolling from the sea, as if the waves spread out before her, and the fisherman trembled in her presence. She stood before him. Well, what does she want now? Asked the selkie. Alas, said the fisherman, she wants to be pope. The selkie stared at him silently, and then running her hands along her beautiful coat, which he had returned to her, said, "Go home then. She is that already." Then she turned and disappeared back into the sea. The fisherman went home, to his home that was no longer a home, and when he came there he saw as it were a large church surrounded by palaces. He pushed his way through the people. The interior was lit up with thousands and thousands of candles, and his wife was dressed in cloth of gold and was sitting on a much higher throne, and she wore 3 great golden crowns. Round her were numbers of church dignitaries, and on either side were standing 2 rows of tapers, the largest of them as tall as a steeple and the smallest as tiny as a Christmas tree candle. All the emperors and kings were on their knees before her and were kissing her foot. "Wife," said the fisherman, barely able to look at her, "are you Pope now?" "Yes," said she, "I am Pope." So he stood staring at her, and it was as if he were looking at the bright sun. When he had watched her for some time, he said, "Ah, wife, please let it be enough now that you are Pope." He felt he was nearly praying, but she sat straight as a tree and did not move or bend in the least. He said again, "Wife, be content now that you are Pope. You cannot become anything more." "We will think about that," said his wife. With these words they went to bed. But the woman was not content. Her want would not allow her to sleep, though she barely knew what it was she wanted, and she kept on thinking and thinking what she could still become. The fisherman slept well and soundly, for he had done a great deal that day, but his wife could not sleep at all and turned from one side to another the whole night long and thought till she could think no longer what more she could become. Then the sun began to rise, and when she saw the red dawn, she went to the end of the bed and looked at it, and as she was watching the sun rise out through the window, she thought, could I not make the sun and man rise?" "Husband," she said, poking him in the ribs with her elbows, "wake up. Go once again to the seal queen. I will be a god." The fisherman was still half asleep, yet he was so frightened that he fell out of bed. He thought he had not heard aright, and opened his eyes wide and asked, "What did you say, wife?" "Husband," she said, "if I cannot make the sun and man rise when I appear, I cannot rest. I shall never have a quiet moment till I can make the sun and man rise." He looked at her in horror, and a shudder ran over him. "Go down at once. I will be a god." "Alas, wife," said the fisherman, falling on his knees before her, "the selkie cannot do that. Emperor and Pope she may make you, but I implore you, be content and remain Pope." Then she flew into a passion. Her hair hung wildly about her face. She pushed him with her foot and screamed, "I am not contented, and I shall not be contented. Will you go?" So he hurried on his clothes as fast as possible and ran away as if he were mad. But the storm was raging so fiercely that he could scarcely stand. Houses and trees were being blown down. The mountains were shaken, and pieces of rock rolled into the sea. The sky was as black as ink. It was thundering and lightning, and the sea was tossing in great waves as high as church towers and mountains, and each had a white crest of foam. So he shouted, not able to hear his own voice, "O wondrous woman, if woman you be, or selkie, seal queen of the sea, come, for my wife Isabel wishes what I dare not tell." The sea foamed with all its fury and pushed up out from itself the selkie queen. She rode the waves which settled her before the fisherman. "Well, what does she want now?" "Alas," he said, "she wants to be a god." The selkie was very quiet. She looked him in the eyes, and she smiled. And suddenly she grew a little bit smaller, and a little bit more gentle. And so did the sea. Everything quieted. "Go home, then," said the selkie, "and there you will find her." So the fisherman went home, and he found his wife sitting most contentedly in front of their hut, as she had for many years. She was gentle and smiling. He found her almost radiant. And there they are to this day. The end. And now, good night. I hope that you've enjoyed this bedtime story, and I hope that you are feeling quiet and content